In the stillness of solitude, where the world falls silent and the distractions fade away, we often find ourselves face to face with the raw essence of who we are. The noise of daily life, the demands, the conversations, the expectations, dissipates, leaving only the whispers of our own thoughts and the steady rhythm of our breath. For many, this silence feels overwhelming, even intimidating. But within it lies a profound opportunity, the chance to meet ourselves fully, to listen deeply, and to cultivate a life that is both peaceful and purposeful. Buddhism teaches us that solitude is not merely the absence of others, but a presence unto itself. It is a space where we can reconnect with our inner world, unearth truths about ourselves, and build a foundation of peace that is unshakable. The Buddha himself found enlightenment in solitude, sitting beneath the Bodhi tree in deep meditation, free from the noise of the world. His journey teaches us that solitude is not a void to be feared, but a sanctuary to be embraced. But embracing solitude is not always easy. We live in a world that celebrates busyness, connectivity, and constant engagement. The idea of being alone, truly alone, can feel foreign or even undesirable. Yet, as we peel back the layers of discomfort and fear, we discover that solitude offers more than just quiet. It offers clarity, strength, and a deeper sense of self. Imagine waking up in the morning to a space that belongs entirely to you. The first breath you take is yours alone, untouched by the needs or expectations of others. There is a freedom in this, a liberation that comes from knowing that your day, your time, and your energy are entirely your own. This autonomy is not just practical, it is deeply spiritual. In the quiet moments of solitude, we learn to listen to ourselves, to our fears, our dreams, and our innermost desires. Take Hiroshi, for example, a young man who chose to leave his busy corporate job and retreat to a small cottage in the countryside. At first, the silence was deafening. Without meetings to attend, emails to answer, or social obligations to fulfill, Hiroshi felt lost. But gradually, he began to embrace the stillness. He discovered a love for gardening, for cooking simple meals, and for spending hours reading under the shade of an old tree. Most importantly, he discovered a love for his own company. Solitude, which once felt like an enemy, became his greatest teacher. This transformation is not unique to Hiroshi. Countless individuals have found peace and purpose in solitude, whether by choice or by circumstance. The key lies in shifting our perspective, in seeing solitude not as a punishment or a deficiency, but as a gift. One of the first lessons of solitude is the importance of shifting from enduring to embracing. When we view solitude as something to be endured, we remain trapped in resistance. The silence becomes suffocating, the stillness unbearable. But when we shift our mindset and begin to embrace solitude, we open ourselves to its gifts. We begin to see the quiet not as emptiness but as space. Space to grow, to reflect, and to heal. Consider May, a woman who had always feared being alone. After a painful breakup, May found herself living in an apartment by herself for the first time in her life. At first, the silence was unbearable. She filled her days with television, phone calls, and endless distractions to avoid the discomfort of her own company. But one evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset, something shifted. She put away her phone, turned off the TV, and simply sat with herself. In that moment of stillness, May felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The fear of being alone began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. This shift, from fear to acceptance, is at the heart of the journey into solitude. It requires patience, courage, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. But the rewards are immeasurable. In solitude, we learn to become our own friend, our own guide, and our own source of comfort. Creating a sanctuary of solitude is another important step in this journey. Our physical space has a profound impact on our inner world, and transforming our homes into places of peace and mindfulness can enhance our experience of solitude. This doesn't require extravagant changes or expensive investments. Sometimes, it's as simple as creating a cozy reading nook, lighting a candle during meditation, or filling your space with plants and natural light. In Buddhist philosophy, our surroundings are seen as extensions of our inner state. A cluttered space often reflects a cluttered mind, while a serene and intentional space can foster a sense of calm and clarity. Hiroshi transformed his cottage into a sanctuary by simplifying his belongings, arranging his space mindfully, and dedicating corners of his home to meditation and reflection. May, too, created a small altar in her apartment, a space where she could light incense, sit in silence, and reconnect with herself. But solitude is not just about physical space. It is also about the rituals we create. Morning rituals like meditation, journaling, or simply sipping tea in silence can set the tone for a peaceful day. Evening rituals, such as reflecting on the day's blessings or practicing gratitude, can help us close each day with a sense of contentment. The art of solitude is also about learning to listen, not just to the external world, but to the whispers of our own hearts. In solitude, we have the opportunity to ask ourselves important questions. What brings me joy? What am I afraid of? What do I truly value? These are questions we often avoid in the busyness of life, but in solitude, they rise to the surface, demanding our attention. There is a powerful story in Buddhist teachings about a monk who spent years meditating in a remote cave. When asked why he chose such extreme solitude, he replied, "In the silence, I met myself." This simple yet profound statement encapsulates the essence of solitude. It is not about escaping the world, but about meeting ourselves fully and without distraction. And yet, solitude is not without its challenges. Loneliness can creep in, doubts can arise, and the silence can sometimes feel too heavy to bear. But these moments, too, are part of the journey. They are invitations to grow, to face our fears, and to deepen our resilience. As we conclude this first part of our exploration into the power of solitude, let us carry forward this understanding. Solitude is not an absence but a presence. It is not a void but a canvas, a space where we can paint the most authentic portrait of ourselves. In the next part of this journey, we will delve deeper into the emotional and spiritual dimensions of solitude, exploring how mindfulness, meditation, and self-compassion can transform our experience of being alone into one of profound connection and inner peace. As Hiroshi continued his exploration of solitude, he began to realize that true peace does not arise simply from being alone, but from learning how to be alone. It is not the external silence that matters most, but the internal stillness we cultivate within ourselves. And yet, this stillness does not come easily. It must be nurtured, practiced, and protected. In a quiet mountain village, Hiroshi met an elderly woman named Kaori. She lived alone in a modest wooden house surrounded by a small garden bursting with colorful flowers. Her days were simple. She woke with the sunrise, tended to her plants, prepared her meals mindfully, and spent her evenings watching the stars. Despite the simplicity of her life, there was an unmistakable radiance about her, a lightness of spirit that seemed to transcend the confines of her humble home. One evening, as they sat together on her porch sipping tea, Hiroshi asked, "Kaori-san, do you ever feel lonely?" Kaori smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the glow of the setting sun. "Loneliness and solitude are not the same, Hiroshi. Loneliness is an ache, a yearning for something absent. Solitude, on the other hand, is a fullness, a quiet presence that fills every corner of your being. The difference lies not in whether we are physically alone, but in how we perceive that aloneness." Kaori's words stayed with Hiroshi as he continued his journey. Loneliness, he realized, is not merely about being without others. It is about being disconnected from oneself. And in that realization lay a profound truth. Solitude is not about escaping others, but about returning to oneself. But how do we bridge the gap between loneliness and solitude? How do we transform silence from something oppressive into something liberating? The answer, Hiroshi discovered, lies in mindfulness. Mindfulness, as taught in Buddhist philosophy, is the practice of being fully present in each moment, without judgment or resistance. It is about noticing the details of our experience, the taste of our food, the sensation of the breeze against our skin, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, and appreciating them fully. In solitude, mindfulness becomes even more essential, for it transforms what might feel like emptiness into a rich tapestry of experience. Take, for example, Hiroshi's time spent by a tranquil lake deep in the forest. He had arrived there feeling restless and unsettled, his mind crowded with worries and regrets. But instead of distracting himself, Hiroshi decided to sit quietly by the water. He closed his eyes and focused on his breath, allowing the rise and fall of his chest to anchor him in the present moment. Gradually, the noise in his mind began to fade, replaced by the soft sounds of water lapping against the shore and birds singing in the distance. In that stillness, Hiroshi felt something shift within him. The weight of his worries lifted, and in their place came a sense of deep, abiding peace. The lake had not changed, nor had the forest. It was Hiroshi who had changed, simply by choosing to be fully present. This is the power of mindfulness in solitude. It allows us to see that the present moment is enough, that we are enough, without needing to fill the silence with distractions or external validations. Yet, mindfulness is not just about quiet moments of meditation. It is also about how we approach the ordinary tasks of daily life. Kaori had shown Hiroshi how even the simplest activities, chopping vegetables, sweeping the floor, brewing tea, could become acts of mindfulness. Every action is an opportunity to be present, she had said. To bring our full attention to what we are doing is to honor the moment we are in. Hiroshi began to incorporate these lessons into his own routine. He approached each task with intention, treating it not as a chore to be completed, but as a meditation to be experienced. Cooking became a sacred ritual, walking a form of prayer, and even washing dishes a moment of quiet reflection. But the journey into solitude is not without its challenges. There are moments when the silence feels heavy, when old wounds resurface, and when the shadows of doubt and fear creep in. In these moments, Hiroshi learned the importance of self-compassion. Self-compassion, as the Buddha taught, is the practice of treating oneself with the same kindness and understanding that one would offer to a dear friend. It is about recognizing our struggles without judgment, acknowledging our pain without resistance, and offering ourselves the warmth of forgiveness. During one particularly difficult night, Hiroshi found himself overwhelmed by feelings of regret and self-blame. The silence of his small cabin felt suffocating, and every thought seemed to echo in the stillness. But instead of running from these feelings, Hiroshi did something different. He spoke to himself with kindness. "It's okay," he whispered softly. "It's okay to feel this way. You are human, and you are allowed to make mistakes. You are doing the best you can." These simple words, spoken with genuine care, felt like a balm on an open wound. The tightness in his chest began to ease, and the heavy silence softened into something more tender and forgiving. This practice of self-compassion became a cornerstone of Hiroshi's experience of solitude. He learned that being alone does not mean being unkind to oneself. On the contrary, solitude is an opportunity to deepen our relationship with ourselves, to offer ourselves the love and care we so freely give to others. As Hiroshi's journey continued, he began to see solitude not as an isolated state but as a bridge that connected him to himself, to the world around him, and to something greater than himself. He discovered that solitude could be a sanctuary for creativity, a workshop for self-reflection, and a gateway to spiritual insight. At one point in his travels, Hiroshi met a painter named Aiko. She lived alone in a small studio overlooking the sea, where she spent her days immersed in her art. When Hiroshi asked her how she found inspiration in solitude, Aiko replied, "Solitude is my muse. In the silence, I hear the colors. In the stillness, I see the stories. There is a clarity here that the noise of the world cannot offer." Aiko's words resonated deeply with Hiroshi. He realized that solitude is not empty. It is overflowing with possibility. It is a space where creativity can bloom, where insights can emerge, and where the soul can breathe freely. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Hiroshi felt himself transforming. He was no longer afraid of the silence, nor was he burdened by the stillness. Solitude had become a companion, a teacher, and a guide. But Hiroshi's journey was not over. There were still deeper layers of solitude to explore, still more lessons to uncover. And as he prepared to take the next step on his path, he felt a quiet certainty settle within him. The answers he sought were not out there in the world, but within the stillness of his own heart. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the intersection of solitude and self-sufficiency, uncovering how living alone can teach us resilience, adaptability, and a profound sense of inner strength. As Hiroshi ventured further into his journey of solitude, he began to notice an undeniable truth. Solitude was not merely about silence and introspection, but also about self-reliance. Living alone, whether physically or emotionally, required a certain resilience, a willingness to confront discomfort, take responsibility for one's well-being, and cultivate skills that foster independence. In a remote village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, Hiroshi met an elderly craftsman named Ryota. Ryota lived in a modest cabin he had built with his own hands, surrounded by tools, unfinished sculptures, and the faint smell of cedar wood. Despite living alone for decades, Ryota exuded a calm strength and a deep sense of purpose. Living alone teaches you things no teacher or book ever could, Ryota said as he worked on carving a wooden statue. It teaches you how to depend on yourself, how to solve problems without waiting for someone else to fix them, and how to find joy in your own company. Hiroshi spent weeks with Ryota, observing his daily routines and learning the quiet discipline that shaped his life. Ryota woke with the sun, prepared his meals with care, and dedicated hours to his craft. There was a rhythm to his solitude, a harmony between work, rest, and reflection. One day, Ryota handed Hiroshi a chisel and a block of wood. "Make something with your own hands," he said. First, Hiroshi hesitated. He had never worked with wood before, and the task felt daunting. But with Ryota's guidance, he began carving. The process was slow and imperfect, but with each cut, Hiroshi felt a growing sense of accomplishment. By the end of the day, he held a small, rough sculpture in his hands. "It's not perfect," Hiroshi said apologetically. Ryota smiled. "Perfection is not the goal. Creation is. When you create something with your own hands, you leave a piece of yourself in it. And in doing so, you learn something invaluable about your own resilience." This lesson stayed with Hiroshi as he continued his journey. Self-reliance, he realized, was not just about physical survival. It was about emotional and spiritual resilience as well. It was about facing fears without running, solving problems without avoidance, and finding fulfillment in the simple act of existing. In another village, Hiroshi met a young woman named Nao, who had recently moved into a small home on the outskirts of town. Nao had grown up surrounded by family and friends, but after a series of losses, she found herself alone for the first time. At first, the silence felt unbearable. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside her window, seemed to amplify her sense of isolation. "I thought I would break," Nao confessed to Hiroshi one afternoon. "But then I realized something. No one is coming to save me. If I want to be happy, if I want to feel at peace, I have to create that for myself." Nao began to embrace her solitude in small, intentional ways. She learned how to fix things around the house, how to cook meals that nourished both her body and soul, and how to fill her days with activities that brought her joy. Slowly but surely, her home transformed from a place of loneliness into a sanctuary. Nao's journey mirrored a universal truth. Solitude reveals our strengths and weaknesses in equal measure. It exposes our dependencies, our fears, and our insecurities. But it also offers us a chance to grow beyond them, to build a foundation of self-trust and inner security that no external circumstance can shake. Hiroshi also discovered that solitude is a fertile ground for creativity. In the absence of constant noise and external validation, the mind becomes free to wander, to imagine, and to create without boundaries. He met a poet named Sara, who lived in a small hut by the sea. Sara spent his days writing verses inspired by the changing tides, the call of seabirds, and the whisper of the wind. In solitude, Sara said, "There are no deadlines, no expectations, no judgment. There is only the page and the pen. And in that space, something magical happens. your true voice emerges. Sora's poetry was raw, honest, and filled with a deep reverence for life. He shared his writings with Hiroshi, and in those verses, Hiroshi saw reflections of his own journey. The creativity born from solitude was not just about art or writing. It was about the courage to express one's true self without fear of rejection or misunderstanding. But Hiroshi also learned that solitude is not about complete isolation. Humans are inherently social creatures, and even those who embrace solitude must find ways to connect meaningfully with others. He encountered a retired teacher named Kinta, who spent most of his time alone but made a point to visit the village square once a week. Connection doesn't have to be constant, Kinta explained, but it must be meaningful. A single heartfelt conversation can nourish the soul more than 100 shallow interactions. This balance between solitude and connection became another cornerstone of Hiroshi's understanding. True solitude is not about rejecting others, but about knowing when to step away and when to step forward. Self-sufficiency, resilience, creativity, and meaningful connection. These became the 4 pillars of Hiroshi's experience of solitude. Each encounter, whether with Ryota, now, Sora, or Kinta, added a layer of wisdom to his understanding. As Hiroshi walked through the fields one evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, he realized something profound. Solitude is not a destination. It is a practice. It is not something to be achieved and then forgotten, but something to be cultivated every day. And within that practice lies an unshakable truth. Everything we need to build a meaningful, fulfilling life already exists within us. Solitude simply gives us the space to discover it. In the next part of our journey, we will delve deeper into the emotional challenges of solitude, how to face loneliness, how to heal old wounds, and how to transform silence into a source of inner strength and clarity. As Hiroshi approached the final chapter of his journey through solitude, he found himself walking along an ancient forest path, the air thick with the scent of pine and the distant murmur of a flowing stream. The lessons he had learned, from Ryota's resilience, now self-reliance, Sora's creativity, and Kinta's wisdom on connection, had woven themselves into the fabric of his being. But Hiroshi sensed that there was still one final lesson waiting for him, a truth that would tie together everything he had discovered. He arrived at a secluded temple perched on a mist-covered hill. The temple was almost hidden by ancient trees, and the faint sound of bells carried through the crisp morning air. There, Hiroshi met an old monk named Kenshin, whose calm demeanor seemed to merge seamlessly with the stillness of the surroundings. "You have traveled far, Hiroshi," Kenshin said as they sat together overlooking the vast expanse of forest below. "What have you learned from your time in solitude?" Hiroshi paused, reflecting on his journey. "I have learned that solitude is not an escape but a return to oneself. I have learned to listen to the silence, to trust my own strength, and to find peace in my own presence." Kenshin nodded, his eyes twinkling with approval. "And yet, there is one final lesson you must learn, Hiroshi. Solitude, like everything in life, must be balanced. Too much solitude can lead to isolation, just as too much noise can drown out the voice of the soul." This idea lingered in Hiroshi's mind as he spent the following days in the temple. Kenshin guided him through meditation practices designed not just for inner peace, but for reintegration with the world. True solitude, Kenshin explained, is not about building walls, but about creating windows. It is not about rejecting the world, but about finding the strength to return to it with clarity and compassion. One evening, Kenshin invited Hiroshi to join him in a ritual by the temple's sacred spring. They carried small lanterns, their warm glow reflecting on the water's surface. Kenshin handed Hiroshi a small stone and said, "This stone represents your burdens, your fears, and your attachments. Release it into the water, and let the ripples remind you that every action, every thought, creates an impact." Hiroshi held the stone tightly for a moment, feeling its weight in his palm. Then, with a deep breath, he released it into the spring. The water rippled outward, and a profound sense of lightness washed over him. "This," Kenshin said softly, "is the final lesson of solitude, to let go. Let go of the need for control. Let go of the fear of stillness. and let go of the belief that solitude is either a curse or a cure. It is simply a space, a sacred space where you meet yourself and prepare to meet the world again. In the days that followed, Hiroshi began to see solitude not as an end but as a cycle, a rhythm of stepping away and returning, of retreating inward and emerging outward. He realized that solitude was not meant to be a permanent state, but a sanctuary to which one could return whenever the noise of life became too loud. When the time came for Hiroshi to leave the temple, Kenshin gave him one final piece of advice. Carry the stillness of solitude within you, no matter where you are. The world will pull you in many directions, but if you can return to that quiet place within your heart, you will always find peace. Hiroshi descended from the temple with a light heart and a clear mind. He returned to the world not as someone who had escaped it, but as someone who had learned to live within it more mindfully. In the months that followed, Hiroshi began to share his experiences with others. He spoke to those who feared solitude, those who longed for it, and those who misunderstood it. He helped people create spaces of peace in their homes, taught them the art of mindful living, and encouraged them to approach solitude not with fear but with curiosity. In one small village, he met a young artist named Emi who struggled with self-doubt and creative blocks. "I can't seem to hear my own voice anymore," Emi confessed. Hiroshi guided her to a quiet grove outside the village and encouraged her to sit in silence for a while. "The voice you seek isn't out there," he said. "It's in here. Listen." Emi spent hours sketching in the grove, and by the end of the day, her hands were stained with charcoal and her heart was light with inspiration. In another town, Hiroshi met a father named Daichi who felt overwhelmed by the demands of his life. Together, they created a small morning ritual: 10 minutes of silence, a cup of tea, and a moment of gratitude. Daichi later shared that these 10 minutes had become the most peaceful part of his day. Hiroshi's journey became not just his own, but a shared experience. The lessons he had learned about self-reliance, resilience, creativity, balance, and letting go began to ripple outward, touching lives in quiet yet powerful ways. But Hiroshi himself never stopped returning to solitude. He understood now that it was not something to achieve or master, but something to revisit again and again. It was a wellspring of peace, clarity, and strength that he could draw from whenever the world grew too loud. One final evening, as Hiroshi sat alone under a sky filled with stars, he reflected on his journey. The fears he had once held about being alone had dissolved into gratitude. The discomfort had transformed into peace. The silence, once oppressive, had become sacred. "Solitude is not about being alone," he whispered into the night. "It is about being whole." And with that, Hiroshi closed his eyes and allowed himself to simply be, not striving, not searching, but resting in the quiet presence of his own soul. This journey, though deeply personal, is one we all share in some way. Solitude is not reserved for monks on mountaintops or poets by the sea. It is a space available to all of us. It is a refuge, a teacher, and a mirror that reflects both our light and our shadows. So let us step into that stillness with open hearts. Let us listen to what it has to teach us, and let us carry its wisdom back into the world. A world that desperately needs the calm strength of those who have learned to find peace within.